So you will be aware that the heart of the computer is the CPU, that is the processor that we use. And the processor come in a lot of variations. So you might have heard about single core, dual core, quad core CPUs, and the next gen actually is really insane. And the ones that we are using on the data center servers are actually mind-blowing. But what does it actually help with virtualization, and how can we assign virtual CPUs is the question here. So this is the Intel Xeon Pentium 9282 processor, which is a Xeon 9200 series processor, which has a whopping 56 cores and 112 threads. So you must be thinking, what's so special about this? But I want to tell you that back in the day when we used to have Pentium i3 processors like i3-8130U, it had only 2 cores and 4 threads. That's all. And the PC that I'm recording right now is the Ryzen 5900X, which is 12 cores, 24 threads CPU, which right now might cost you around 60,000. Can you imagine what the cost of the data center CPUs would be? Don't worry, we will get to that, so keep watching. So all these processors that you see have cores and threads, isn't it? What it means is that each core that you have on a CPU is the physical computational unit present on the CPU that you own, like this. So this is a Core i7 CPU with 4 cores. As you can see here, the 4 cores present on the chipset die. We actually won't go in depth on this, but let me know if you need to learn more on this. We can actually make a whole video on how processor is actually designed. So do let me know on the comment section below. So a core actually works on a particular task, and the other core will work on the other task, and so on. And logically, the more cores that you have, the better performance you get. Not exactly, but there are other things involved which we won't discuss right now, but just keep in mind that the more cores that you have, the better performance you will get. And the threads that you have here are responsible for you to have a higher throughput and speed at which you can accomplish the task. So if you have to draw an analogy here, so 8 people working with 10 hands each is better than 2 people working with 4 hands. I know that's a very bad analogy, but I hope you get the point. So let's just remove this. Now that you have an idea of what a CPU core and thread is and why is it important, let's talk about virtual CPU. So imagine the CPU that you have. What if I tell you each core that you have can act as a vCPU and more, because you can have multiple vCPUs by assigning time slots within a CPU core to create a virtual CPU on its own. Yes, that's how it works. Virtual CPU is not the actual physical CPU core, but the time slot within the physical CPU across all the CPU cores that you have or your processor has. So with one CPU core, you can have multiple vCPUs created, because vCPU or virtual processors does not represent one-to-one allocation between the physical core and the actual vCPU that you have. But instead, it represents the time on the physical CPU resource pool. And that is why you might have seen, even if we have a processor with 2 cores, you can still run 2 or 3 virtual machines on the same hardware. So let's assign these vCPUs to our virtual machines. If you see, we are assigning 3 to 4 time slots, also called as vCPUs, and we are able to create the virtual machine here. And this is done by the hypervisor. But how do you know how many vCPUs that you have? So let's see the calculations for vCPU count for the 9282 processor that we have here right now. So this is a simple formula that is based on my reading on the IBM documentations. So you multiply the number of threads and the number of cores, and to that you multiply the number of physical CPUs that you have. So in our case, we have 56 cores multiplied to 112 threads, and as we have one physical CPU, the unit will remain as 1. So we get a total of 6,272 vCPUs. This amount of computational power is beyond what you will use. So this CPU is obviously not for personal use unless you're running a mad in-house server. At this point of time, the price of this ranges from, it comes somewhere around 18 lakhs to 36 lakh rupees. Might as well get 2 cars from this. But moving on.